Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jacob Winograd. I'm with you here live in the LCI green room. Happy to be with you tonight, and we're going to get right into things. I have a returning guest on the show, and last time he was on the show, we had a conversation about actually atheism and Christianity and libertarianism and all of that. But tonight's conversation is going to obviously probably still showcase some of our different worldviews and beliefs, which I am happy to do that. I think people who are regulars on this show know that I don't shy away from having people on who have different viewpoints than me, different worldviews than me. I kind of find that interesting. I think this show would be boring if I just had a carousel of just, Christian libertarians and anarchists on who just we agree with each other all the time, right? So it's more interesting to kind of have that contrast and even disagreement, but kind of showcasing how we can do that in a way that's edifying, that's sort of building rather than tearing down and burning bridges. I think that's a libertarian virtue. If you're going to have a free society, you have to have dialogue. It's the whole libertarian liberty ethic is to have conversation and persuasion as the norm rather than violence. So, but something that is often divisive in conservative and libertarian circles is how we view history, how we view foreign policy, and even how we view just certain pundits, right? And maybe in yesteryear, it was people like Pat Buchanan, and in today's day and age, it's people like Tucker Carlson who are constantly in the news, and there are people on the right who are trying to cancel Tucker, much like I think they back. And I'm kind of just going off of my knowledge on this. I obviously wasn't really. I was a kid when a lot of this was happening, but people I think were trying to do some kind of equivalent of cancellation, or at least smear jobs, or maybe in their mind they thought it was legitimate criticisms of Pat Buchanan. So tonight, my guest and I are going to get into this and get into if people like Pat Buchanan were vindicated in their views, and then Tucker Carlson and his ilk, do they bring more good than bad to the table, or are they kind of dumping something toxic into the public discourse? The guest that I have on for tonight, second time on the show, he has his own show. I believe the title is The Rational Egoist. Let's see, how much do we have in different? I'm a Christian. He's an atheist. I'm an anarchist. He's an objectivist. And there's plenty of other things we disagree on too. But I rather like this guy. I think that we actually got to meet him a few months ago. I had a great time hanging out with him. I'm going to bring him up on the stage now. His name is Michael Leibowitz. So, hitting the wrong buttons there. Give me a second here to get this right. It's not like I do this full time. Hey, Micah, how you doing tonight? Oh, hold on. You're muted. We unmute you
Oh,
there. There you
no.
go.
All right. Well, we're late. It's my fault. Just because I hit the wrong button. I'm woefully technologically inadequate, and I'm sitting here staring at a thumbnail for 15 minutes before I realized what was going on.
Well, everything's objective except time. Time is relative. I don't know. There was a joke there or something. Michael, it's your second time on the show. You got your backdrop up behind you, unlike last time for your show. Go a little bit into detail. Just introduce yourself again to the audience and tell us about your show. What do you talk about? What kind of guests do you have? What drives you? What are your interests?
Ideas drive me. Ideas have driven me, I should say, for quite some time. I like to have on a variety of guests. I'm an objectivist, and I obviously want to push objectivist ideas, but in order to try to make or get objectivists to be mainstream, I try to have on not only objectivist guests, but other guests, psychologists, philosophers, just to show where there's commonalities so that I can try to mainstream objectivism that way. Plus, I get smarter by getting to interview a lot of smart people. I've been able to have on a lot of guys that I read while I was, well, I don't know if this has already been said, but when I was incarcerated, I read a lot of people. Just the other day, I interviewed Sheldon Richman. That's out now. I used to read his columns in what's the word? The Ideas on Liberty magazine. I also, by the way, do a daily show called The Capitalist Corner every day at 12 o'clock. That we live stream it. A lot of fun. We got into a big argument on the show today because I'm like you. I don't just want to talk to people that are just going to agree with me all the time. That's not my jam. You know, it's not like, what am I learning that way? Nothing.
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, I think that I've learned way like so reading is obviously I think, you said you read a lot. I love to read. I love to listen to podcasts and audiobooks. But sometimes I feel like even when you're learning new information, you don't know it as well as you know it after you kind of like have a conversation with someone about that subject, whether you agree or disagree, or, sometimes you agree partially, but not the whole way. And obviously free speech in a political sense means to just have the freedom to say what you want without the government persecuting you. But I find often that like having hard conversations with people where I disagree or just have slight disagreements with, it helps you understand your ideas better or finds them, it makes them stronger. And if probably something we have, I think, at common, like at root, is that we have a pursuit of the truth. And even if we wildly disagree on what the truth is on the matter, we're both really earnestly trying to figure out the truth. And I think that if you have two people who that's their goal, they're not trying to like, do this sort of like I know we've both debated Andrew Wilson, and there's something about like those blood sports debates,
I don't like
which
them.
can be, I think that like in the same way you can maybe find entertainment from like watching the WWE, there can be like this sort of like superficial enjoy like entertainment value they have to them, but you're not for the most part learning in that style of debate. I think that I enjoy debates where I feel like the people are engaging in good faith. They're trying to steel man each other. They're trying to understand one another. And even if they're disagreeing, I feel like when I listen to those blood sports debates, I don't come away feeling like I learned much. I just kind of,
Nah.
other than maybe like debate tactics, but even then, a lot of those are just kind of like, kind of like punching below the belt debate tactics. They're not in the sort of ethos of trying to understand truth and things like that.
I agree. I've had a couple of these blood sport debates, and I've gone into them and said I'm not doing blood sport. What I should say is I've debated people that are into blood sport debating, and in the case of Wilson, we were supposed to each give an opening statement on our position. I was going to defend objectivist ethics. He was going to defend divine command theory. Instead, he came on, he misrepresented my position, misrepresented what I said in my opening, misrepresented Ayn Rand's position. And then when I called him out on it, said, yeah, well, why is it wrong to have sex with your sister? And then just would not let me get in a word in edgewise. And there's just no way you can have a debate under those circumstances. It's just not possible. And the thing, I think with somebody like that, they view people that they debate with almost as like their enemies. I don't view somebody I'm debating with. I don't view you as my enemy. We met at the debate between Alex Naresta and Dave Smith, each probably rooting for a different guy. Each probably thought their guy won. And then afterwards at the party, we went and we talked and had a great time. There's
Yeah.
no reason for me to hate you because I disagree with you.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. So one of the things that this was like we just scheduled this, I guess, like a week ago or so. It was very impromptu, but the topic interested me because this sort of came off of, speaking of Dave Smith, he had recently had Tucker on his show and then Candace on his show. And there's obviously been a lot of people on the right, such as like Ben Shapiro and whatnot, who have been trying to cancel Tucker after he had Nick Fuentes on. Then the Heritage Foundation came out and was like defending him. And it's just caused like there's this like civil war going on, so to speak, on the right now, especially the MAGA right. And I don't even remember what I said. You might remember it, but I think I said something to the effect of kind of agreeing with a take that Dave had. I might have like clipped something of Dave's. And then I think you were coming in and having kind of arguing that you don't think that that Tucker Carlson is a figure who is of high quality, and that you don't think Pat Buchanan, and who's often been brought up in these discussions, because I think Matt Walsh was, I think this might have been actually the Matt Walsh thing too, because Matt Walsh was saying he's a Buchananite, that he kind of identifies more as a paleoconservative, or at least mostly agrees with paleoconservative ideas, and guys like Pat Buchanan. And there's a lot of controversies. That saying, history doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And you kind of feel like what's going on the right now is sort of like what they were going through, I guess, about 20 years ago, at least some similarities there. So I want to, you know, kind of give you the floor here to sort of open up with just your general. I guess we'll start with Buchanan first, since he's sort of the historic figure that a lot of people, even like guys like Dave Smith and a lot of Rothbardian libertarians, of course, if you go back to like the paleo strategy, they had a lot of affinity for guys like Pat Buchanan. So what's your sense of Pat Buchanan? How do you evaluate him? Is there anything about him that you find good? What do you find bad? And we can kind of jump into the conversation from there.
I used to watch Pat Buchanan every Sunday on the McLaughlin group, and I would by and large agree with his takes. And he was one of these guys that even when I disagreed with him, I would see he's well informed. He makes strong arguments. He's a smart guy. I'm not like looking at him saying, look at this nut or look at this idiot. I think he's a very bright guy. The claim was that Pat Buchanan has been almost entirely vindicated. Now, like you said, I don't remember. There's so much stuff on Twitter. I can't remember who says what half the time. But the claim was Tucker Carlson is great. Pat Buchanan's been vindicated. So I said, well, who wants to debate this? And you said, I'll do it, but we got to come up with a better prop for the Tucker stuff, because great is sort of too ambiguous of a term. So the idea that I wanted to debate is on the vindication of Pat Buchanan. But it occurs to me that we haven't discussed, what does vindicate here mean? Does it mean that he's been proven correct? Does it mean that his views are widely accepted? And I'm not really sure what exactly is meant by vindication in this case.
No, that's a good question. I would say, I guess it's one of those things that you don't necessarily even have to couch it in terms of like entirely vindicated is probably more a hyperbolic figure of speech. I mean, no one in history has ever been like entirely vindicated in everything they've said, other than I guess I would say that Jesus Christ was, but that's because I have a a Christian presupposition I'm sneaking in there. But any just human being, like I'm sure you would not even say that you think Ayn Rand has been vindicated in everything she ever believed or said, even though, but you would probably think that Ayn Rand has been like way more vindicated than not. Like rating like probably like 80 to 90% vindicated. And
it's going to depend what you mean. It's going to depend what you mean. So like if we take Buchanan's views, and you could tell me if you disagree, but I think 5 here. He was on foreign policy. He was an isolationist. He was big against the neocons, against the relationship with Israel. That was a big sticking point for him. He opposed mass migration and multiculturalism. He actually wanted to have a 5-year moratorium on immigration to have no immigrants coming in. He opposed free trade, supported tariffs. He made the argument that the latter half of the 19th century was prosperous because of tariffs. He vehemently, he was a staunch Catholic, or he is a staunch Catholic. I shouldn't speak of him in the past tense. He's still living, but opposed abortion, and he opposed homosexuality and gay marriage. Those are issues that, when I think Buchanan, those are the issues that he made strong arguments for.
Yeah, I think that's mostly like, I think I know him mostly for his foreign policy stuff. I think I've also heard, I'm not an expert, but I think his foreign policy is a little mixed depending on when you evaluate him, because I think he was very much a Cold War like warrior. So I think he was like, I think he believed, from what I can recollect, that we had to have this sort of I think he used the expression totalitarian bureaucracy at home to fight the totalitarian bureaucracy abroad, right? We had to become some kind of like world empire to fight against the threat of the Soviets. But then after the Cold War ended, he felt like, well, now it's time to return to being a more limited constitutional republic. and the neocons kind of coming in and saying, no, with the fall of the Soviet Union, now it's they use the term like unipolar moment, and we can, sort of take advantage of being the sole remaining superpower. This was something that Buchanan very much opposed. And so I think after that point, he did become more of a strict isolationist.
Well,
So
he's also like he argued that we shouldn't have gotten involved in World War II. He debated Andrew Roberts
yeah,
for instance, on the character of Winston Churchill.
he wrote a whole book on Winston Churchill.
Right. So, but yeah, his arguments that are appealing to, I would say, libertarians are not we need a totalitarian bureaucracy to fight the Cold War. They're
Right.
isolationists.
Right.
Here is where I largely agree with him. Not necessarily for the same reasons, but I'm opposed to foreign aid, all of it. So for me, I don't want to give Israel money. I don't want to give Ukraine money. I don't want to give the Arab countries money, and I don't want to give anybody else money. So that's my reasoning for it. But to say Buchanan has been vindicated, if we're talking about in terms of effect, well, the president of the United States right now, although he ran on a platform of peace, he's bombing alleged drug dealers. He's, aiding Ukraine. We've got soldiers in Israel right now. So I don't know how we can say Buchanan's been vindicated. And about roughly half the American people still support America's relationship with Israel. So that hasn't gone anywhere. So regardless of what I happen to think, to say he's been vindicated here, I think in the minds of libertarians who agree with his views, he's been vindicated. But to me, vindicated means something more than just that.
So are you saying that for him to have been vindicated, he would have had to kind of shifted the Overton window and like the majority of Americans to kind of like adopt something approximating his views on certain things?
Well, that could be one way to. That's why I said we need to discuss what vindication means.
Sure,
Because vindication can mean proven correct, or it can mean vindicated in the fact that people have now accepted his view. The two don't necessarily coalesce, right? Because people could accept the view and it just be wrong. But you could still say he was vindicated in pushing this because it has popular appeal. I remember on the McLaughlin group years ago when the anti-immigration mood was kind of rising, and McLaughlin joked with him and said, this could have been your time, Buchanan. And so in a sense, then he could have said, well, I've been vindicated. That doesn't mean proven right. But I would argue that on each of the points that I've listed, he's neither been proven correct or vindicated by, has been adopted by a wide variety of people or a majority of people. The closest I think he comes is on the foreign policy stuff where he wants America to stay out of other people's affairs.
So we might have some broad agreement here, I think. Like in my notes, I had kind of the two biggest things on foreign policy, and there's a lot more, but I kind of just picked two, I think, major things that relate to what's going on today. Is he was very much against NATO expansion after the end of the Cold War, and he was warning that if we didn't kind of handle this correctly, and that we expanded NATO and we kind of treated Russia more like a former enemy rather than a potential ally to gain and help, that this would kind of lead to a revival of the Cold War, and that this would obviously keep him this would come with some sort of not just potential provocations towards the Russians, but also that these foreign entanglements of keeping NATO and having the US be sort of very active abroad would come with sort of consequences for our liberties and for our economic freedoms and prosperity at home. And I think he's been largely vindicated there in terms of I think that it's possible to simultaneously say that Vladimir Putin is not a good guy and that the invasion of Ukraine was wrong, but that it didn't happen completely in a vacuum and that it wasn't completely unprovoked by the entirety of sort of Western policy and especially American foreign policy going back 20 years. And the other big thing I think is his opposition to the war on terror, broadly speaking, but then especially he was like one of the most outspoken people against the Iraq war. And I think that one's almost he was entirely vindicated in terms of being right. And I don't know, like you might be able to say even vindicated in terms of public view, because even most of the neocons and war hawks will admit that Iraq was sort of a fumble, right? Even if they defend the war on terror, broadly speaking. So anything there you would, you
I would
know,
just, when it comes to foreign policy, I'm far, what's the word I'm looking for here? Less confident in my arguments than I am when it comes to domestic stuff or philosophy. And the reason that is because it's very complex. Like the case I always think about is we get involved in World War I. And by we, I just mean America. I'm not a collectivist, but I don't have a better way to put it. So we get involved in World War I. This ultimately leads to the Treaty of Versailles. It leads to, the tough deal that Germany got. In large part ends up leading to Hitler. So now we end up fighting Hitler. In order to beat Hitler, we side with Stalin. Then that ends up having Stalin is controlling, or Russia, the Soviet Union controlling half of Europe for 70 years. Then in order to battle them, we end up taking, we side with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and then they end up now, because we bolstered them, we end up having to fight them. But what we don't know are the counterfactuals. Right? What if we don't do any of that? What happens? Now, at the time of the Iraq war, I was for it. I was partially for it. I wasn't buying into the whole changing hearts and minds, but I said, I'll leave my mind open to it. The problem with, you say we criticized the Iraq war and it was a failure, right? And I agree, by the way. But I can also understand that Paul Wolfowitz says, how can you say my strategy failed when it was never tried? Right? It's like, it's with anything, like suppose somebody on the domestic side, you and I assume you like tax cuts. You think tax cuts are good for the economy, right? So now, but if they cut taxes and at the same time increase spending, regulate other things, and then there's bad effects, and then someone says, look, these idiots and their tax cuts. And then we're like, wait a second. You can't just implement part of my plan. So I get what Wolfowitz is arguing. I don't agree with him. I'm just saying that to if you're going to argue that Buchanan has been vindicated, we need a sort of a objective measure of that vindication. And in my view, it has to be more than just Iraq, even though I largely agree. If there's a place Buchanan's been vindicated, I say foreign policy.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think what wasn't Wolfowitz? I get all I don't like. I did all this deep dive like a month ago when Dave Smith was on Coleman Hughes' show, and I refreshed my mind on all this. But I don't have a steel trap or names and things like that. But what was Wolfowitz? Was this the part where he wanted to go in to Iraq, but he wanted to install a monarchy, and instead we went in and tried to install a democracy? I think that was kind of part of the.
I don't know.
Difference.
I mean, I lived through it. I remember at the time when they started talking about the regime change and that's going to be great and all that. I started thinking might be a bad idea, but I also was reading some pretty good arguments for it. So I said, you know what, let me just stand back and go with it. And, I really mistrust the mainstream media. My mistake was thinking that because I couldn't trust the mainstream media, I could trust right-wing radio and right-wing media.
Sure. Yeah.
And they were saying, no, the Iraq war is actually going much better than the media's, reporting. So that's what I was buying at the time. Shame on me. But, it's over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what each person's position was. I do remember Paul Wolfowitz, Daniel Pearl. These were the neocons. These were Rumsfeld. These were the guys that were making the argument for this sort of strategy. And I think they were wrong. All I'm saying is that they do have an argument that says, look, you didn't even try what we recommended.
Yeah, I would I know you're kind of just saying what their position is, not saying it's your position. Like I
It's
would,
definitely not my
yeah.
position. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that, like, listen, someone could always kind of say, well, it wasn't implemented exactly the way I wanted it, but it's kind of like, okay, but you got a lot more of what you wanted, and the neocons and half the people we just mentioned were in the George Bush administration,
yeah,
like, and they had the ability to do all this. So it's like, well, whatever the case, you were the ones who were, you know, in the driver's seat culturally
sure.
and politically. So it's on you no matter what. And, listen, like, I kind of get the counterfactuals point, but it's almost like, listen, like, no, with anything, foreign policy, economics, uh, like we never can perfectly know the counterfactuals,
It's true.
but it's always like, okay, there's the unknown counterfactuals, then there's the known outcomes of what you did. And so at the very least, we have to acknowledge that the known outcomes of what you did, that bore bad fruit. So we
Yeah.
we need to at least do something different than that. Doesn't necessarily mean that, like, sure, you would, it would be going too far, I think, to say that the failure of the Iraq War alone proves that the non-interventionist or isolationist position is correct, but I would say that at least that in this case
It's evidence.
it's evidence, and
Yes,
I
I
think
agree with you.
it's partly vindicating of Buchanan's warning that the Iraq war was going to be a disaster. I think that there's obviously, this is still a debate going on right now, right? In terms of like, well, was the entire war on terror a disaster? And is the entire kind of like neoliberal foreign, or what they call the rules-based liberal order post Cold War, post World War II consensus, like, is the entire thing a failure and needs to be scrapped, or was it just they've botched certain interventions and decisions, but it's still more or less good? Because I think with their, to Steelman, kind of what you're saying, they would actually zoom out and say, I remember that Bill Kristol debated Scott Horton, and I think one of the questions Scott asked, or no, one of the audience people asked, was like, what would you have to, like, how do you evaluate success of your post World War II liberal world order? And he's like, well, that a nuclear bomb hasn't been used since World War II. And it's like, well, okay. And he's like, maybe this is all bad, but it could have been so much worse. I guess I'm kind of like, you know what? Like, at some point we have to run the experiment, I think, right? Like, we need to actually try a non-interventionist, or what people might call isolationist, foreign policy, to get some data on that. Because I just think overall, like, if I asked you to even try to steel man, what's the good fruit of the neoliberal, neocon, however you want to label it, interventionist foreign policy of the last 50 years, I don't see what good fruit they could point to other than just the, like, well, there hasn't been another nuclear bomb dropped. It's like, well, that's I like,
Well, I mean,
okay.
well, there also hasn't been a world war. I mean, and world trade has been opened up. I don't know what, maybe it could have been done better. But Iraq, just to, I agree, I'm gonna go with you on this. I think that this is a good resolution to the first part of his isolationism. I think he's been partially vindicated. I'll give you that, because in my view, I'm just thinking back now about Iraq, and no matter what they were going to do, I don't care what they did, they were never going to gain the acceptance of Muqtada al-Sadr. Right? He was never in the Shia. We're never going to want Americans there. And
Right.
that was evident almost from the beginning. So I don't care what, Wolfowitz would have done. So in that sense, I mean, Buchanan was vindicated there. And I do think that a non-intervention stance is the right stance to take. I just don't think that I would go along with Buchanan's arguments for it.
Fair enough. I want to go to the next of your things. I want to read some of the comments quick, just because there's a lot of people who are watching this. A lot of people said hi at the beginning, which I appreciate. Hello, everyone. I will not say 677. Oh, you just got me. I just said it. Haha. Sorry. Some people said, "What's up?" I don't get the whole 6-7 thing. That's like one of those weird young people jokes, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm 33 now, so I'm no longer a young person. I'm no longer up with the young people humor. Liquid Zulu commented and just asked to verify. Yes, I am. I don't know if any of you are watching it on the vertical stream. I'm testing that out because I see YouTube does lives on vertical now, which I don't know if that some people prefer it, but StreamYard, the service I used, was like, hey, you can do this now. So I'm testing it out. So, but yeah, thanks to Zulu for mentioning that. Let's see. What is your favorite color of the alphabet? True or false?
Yep.
47. Sorry, no, 42. Buchanan rocked. He was a Cold War warrior in the 1970s and 80s. Yep, that's right. Shout out for Free. Are you smarter than a politician? Retweeted this, and so did Amity. I was just on Are You Smarter Than a Politician last week. It was a very, very good time. Very interesting show. Have you been on? I think you've been on, right?
I never heard of it.
You never heard of it? I'll have to hook
No.
you up because you would be
Hook me up.
you'd be a good guest on that show. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. Iraq is such a ethnically, culturally, and religiously diverse nation that making it a Western democracy was a pipe dream.
I
Yeah,
agree.
I agree with that. All right. So, Michael, what was your next in terms of the different? You had like 5 things there. What's your next thing in terms of
Well,
evaluating?
his opposition to mass migration and multiculturalism, in terms of wanting to have a 5-year moratorium on immigration. If we're going to judge that in terms of popular acceptance, that's not. People still have high views of immigration. They might not want as many coming in as are coming in, and they might not want the bad dudes coming in, but people by and large are still in favor of immigration. So he hasn't been vindicated there. As to the rightness or wrongness of his position, I will simply say this. If Buchanan claims to be a constitutionalist, which he did, Article 1, Section 8 lays out the powers of Congress. Regulating immigration is not a power granted to Congress. I have James Madison backing me up with this. People are going to argue. They're going to say no naturalization. No, naturalization is not immigration. They're going to say, look at the 1808 clause. No, that doesn't do it either. The sovereignty that the court ultimately read into the Constitution in order to give them authority over immigration was just judicial hocus pocus, legislating from the bench, which conservatives claim to hate. So if Buchanan was truly or is truly a strict constructionist, an originalist, he's got to be for immigration. And on moral terms, I don't know how deep you want to get into it, but on moral terms, he's just wrong on immigration.
So I'm an ANCAP. I'm not a constitutional scholar, and this is not a part of the American history that I know as well as other parts. But I've heard some people, and I think I agree with you on the broad strokes there, but I do know like what the common objections are to that constitutionalist argument. So I'm curious if you have anything to what these rebuttals usually are. They'll bring up like the Naturalization Act of 1802, which I think was to amend a previous Naturalization Act of 1798.
Sure.
So and people often it's the ones who are really pushing actual like white nationalism, because they'll cite this and say that like, well, it specified that immigration was for like white people, right, and free white people, and that they had to
so
anyway, all those other things that were added to it. But yeah, go ahead if you know anything about this.
Alex Tibbetts is absolutely correct. For the first 100 years, the states had control over immigration, and there's a reason for that. Because according to the 10th Amendment, whatever is not explicitly delegated to Congress is reserved to the states and the people, right? The power over immigration is not explicitly delegated to Congress. You can read the Constitutional Convention debate. I want to say it's on August 13th. The subject to immigration comes up. Somebody suggests limiting it, and they just went sick on them. Because you got to remember, at the time the Constitution is being debated, they wanted people coming in. They weren't trying to keep people out. They put the naturalization clause in there because they were concerned that foreigners would come here, get citizenship, run for office, and take over the government. That was the concern. But if you read the Constitutional Convention debates, you read the Federalist Papers, you read the Constitution, you can read Madison's report of 1800, it's clearly clearly not a federal power. I've discussed this with Ilya Soman. I've had him on my show to talk about it. Even Richard Epstein, who he believes in a prescriptive constitution. And what he means by that is once a power is accepted over time, it's there. And it makes no sense to go back and argue originalism. But when I pushed Richard on it, I said, okay, should an originalist argue for immigration restrictions? And he just said, no. So, I mean, there are arguments against each one. I would just say go to the original documents, check them out. I mean, the evidence is there.
Yeah, this is such a funny, and I don't want to go too deep into this detour, but it's such a funny thing because, like, if I wasn't an anarchist, I would be a strong originalist. Because I think if you're going to have a constitution, if you're going to say you're going to have a monopoly over law in a specific geographic region, then you need to have a sort of, I don't know the right way of putting this, like an epistemological view of what government is and like what is these contracts, how they're supposed to be read, that like you can't open the door even a little
I
bit
agree.
to interpreting it other than what the plain reading and originalist intention means. And anything that deviates from that has to be like, you can change the Constitution. There's a
Yes.
process for that. You can't change it by just saying like, oh, well, like, that was 100 years ago. And so we don't believe that way anymore. It's like, well, fine. If you're going to make that argument, I need you to like prove that in writing through the method of saying we don't believe that anymore and we're going to change it. So,
it's funny you say that, dude, because I by no means think the Constitution is a perfect document at all. Randy Barnett, who swayed me a lot in these issues, he said, if you're reading the Constitution and it validates all your views, you're not reading it right.
It didn't even validate all the founding fathers' views.
No, of course not. Like, I'm against taxation. But clearly, I don't then say, well, the Constitution doesn't give them the power to tax. It clearly does. Right? But nevertheless, like you said, if you're going to go by this and we're going to go to court and argue from it, then we ought to go by what it means so that everybody involved knows what the hell it is we're talking about. And it's just not at the mercy of whatever judge happens to be sitting on the bench.
Yep. No, I agree 100% with that. That is why I know we'll go different directions with this. We'll look at the flaws of the Constitution. I think that like someone saying, well, the interpretation of the Constitution changes over time and there's no point in going back and trying to debate what's been kind of commonly accepted after a period of time. That's one of the reasons why I tend towards anarcho-capitalism. I know you would opt for just a better constitution, right? Or a better model of governance.
Yeah,
probably. I'd even imagine
would.
you're probably of the opinion that it's not practical to have a government that governs as large of a geographic region as the continental
This
United
is what I
States.
think, Jacob. I think that if you and I were to have a debate, and I've debated many anarchists, famous anarchists, and I can concede that my position is very utopian in a sense. And I think that your position is utopian in a sense. And what I mean by that is, in order for you to have an anarchist society, you're going to have to convince enough people to have an anarchist society. In order to have a minarchist society where you have one government, but it's funded voluntarily or through lottery or some such thing, you're going to have to convince enough people. The only way either of us gets what we want is to convince enough people.
Yep.
It's simply impossible. The culture simply right now, it's not happening. People need to be convinced of liberty. A constitution's not going to protect us. Laws aren't going to protect us unless we have enough people that are going to accept the ideas. Nothing protects us. So I learned that, by the way. Let me just say one last thing. In prison, I used to be involved in this thing called the Alternatives to Violence Project. I was one of the inmate facilitators. And to me, it was very important that we had a high moral standing in the prison community. We simply could not have guys in the community saying, you're talking about that now, but I know what you do in the block. But the other inmates, a lot of them weren't living up to what we should be doing. So I said, aha, I've got the solution. We'll adopt a set of ethical principles. Everybody will sign it. That'll solve the problem. Everybody signed it. Nobody adhered to it. When I went to argue, they all said, Leibowitz, you're being way too literal, because the culture wasn't right for it. And our culture is not right for it.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think that's a good segue back into this conversation about immigration and Buchanan, because this is a subject that I really struggle with. And I'm curious, like, let's just like remove the is it constitutional or not from the analysis, and just like Buchanan's view that if we didn't have a sort of like pause in immigration and be careful about who's coming here, that this would be detrimental for American culture and liberty long term. And on one hand, when I listen to people like Alex Nowasta and I listen to other like Brian Kaplan, other open borders advocates, and they talk about the economic benefits of free migration. I understand that. Mises is a good person that gets into that as well. And also, there's just the sort of practical libertarian critique that you give the federal government the ability to be the central planner who decides who can be here and who can't be here. Well, how do you enforce that? Like, and as a lot of people who voted for Trump, who were libertarians this last election, are finding out, it's kind of hard to separate the I want to have the closed borders without the sort of like authoritarian police state that you sort of need to enforce that over a
Yeah,
landmass as big as America. But I also feel like there is something to Buchanan and even people like Dave and others' concern that, okay, even if all that's true, isn't there also this risk of open borders inviting a lot? Because we just said the whole way to create a free society is through culture. And there is something I think risky about having the door open to just let, and I agree with you that our culture is very far from liberty. I also add, as a Christian, it's very far from, insofar as like there's people who think that we're a Christian nation. I go, I don't think you're anywhere close to exhibiting what I would define Christian values as being. Nevertheless, it's a lot better here on both of those fronts than other places in the world.
sure.
And inviting, like, so on one hand, when I'm in my non-interventionist arguments and foreign policy arguments, I'm kind of critical of people who like to reduce that calculation to just Muslims bad. But it's like, hey, there probably is consequences like we've seen in Europe to some extent of if you just had, 20, 30, or 40 million Arab Muslim immigrants over, a 5-10 year period. So I don't know. I would say I don't think that Buchanan's been totally vindicated in either way there, but I don't know. Maybe there's a nugget there of like, we still don't know in terms of like, how do we handle this problem? I want to get your take on that.
Well, past isn't necessarily prologue, but I will say this. Those arguments have been being made since the beginning. If we let this group in, it's going to ruin our culture. We're going to lose our liberties. They're not like us. I mean, it's said of the Italians, the Irish, the Chinese, and probably an abundance of others.
The Jews.
Yeah, Jews. Now it's primarily said in terms of Muslims and South Americans. So that's the first thing. So that's it. Doesn't now. It doesn't mean now the boy who cried wolf. Right. Eventually the wolf comes. So, but it does make me pause when people are saying that, so that even when I do sense that I have an inclination to say maybe there's something to that. Okay, but is that just my own present bias, the same way it was the bias of the people back then? What is the actual evidence that that's occurring? And there's also the case that the people that come here often want to come here because of the freedom. They want to get away from other places. So it's almost like they're not the norm that's in the place where they are, right? They want to come here for something different. And then you have the thing where it's like, okay, are we going to be initiating force against people? Because in order to stop them, you have to initiate force. And then there's the further argument that you just made. In reality, what happens? They want the ISIS on the streets. They want to put the military on the streets. They want to, the National Guard all over the place. American citizens are getting caught up in this problem now. It's just that all that is part of the equation. But to get back to Buchanan, I don't see how we can make any kind of argument that he has been vindicated on immigration. He wanted to have a 5-year moratorium, right? He was vehemently opposed to mass migration. And the American people aren't where he is, that's for sure. Ethically, I think he was wrong, and constitutionally, he was wrong. So I can't give him any vindication.
I get where you're coming from, and I think that it's one of those things where I think we could probably find a lot of agreement here. I think insofar as our country is unlibertarian or unobjectivist, and we don't have a true free market, and we have all these distortions in the legal system, and it's more central. Like if you're going to do the Constitution, it should be the federalist kind of vision of government, and we're not really doing federalism
Yeah.
really good right now. So insofar as you have all that, I think that historically the melting pot worked because we had those things more in the past. And I think immigration works, maybe not like it's not a total disaster yet, but it's more risky now insofar as we've veered from those things. And so it's kind of this like, we ideally, what I want, which is, I don't think it's utopian, but it is hard, is to simultaneously not restrict immigration and to alleviate the potential risks or negative effects of immigration that can come by just making our society more free so that these problems don't
I
crop up as
agree,
much.
but see, to me the argument is always we need more freedom, and that was something that libertarians and conservatives used to understand, that controls breed more controls. But then when people come and say, no, you can't have immigration when you have a welfare state, okay, well then let's argue to get rid of the welfare state. Let's just consistently argue against controls. Now we have a guy in the audience, and this guy, I got to tell you, it's like every single time I ever interact with him, I feel he misrepresents what I say. Right. So he says here, you can defend private borders and even open borders without pretending civilizational enemies and invaders don't exist. Okay. We weren't even talking about that. We were talking about cultural impact. And my point is only that I'm very skeptical of the claims that allowing immigrants in from wherever is ultimately going to destroy the culture. Of course, there's bad actors out there that want to come into the country. Of course there are.
Well,
But go ahead.
what if we have evidence of like, and I think there's a slippery slope here. So I imagine you might kind of respond by saying that's dicey, but I'll see clips of, Muslims saying that like, well, our plan is to kind of like, we view ourselves as foreign invaders and we're coming here to kind of like wait until the right moment to then commit acts of terrorism and try to take over local or state governments or whatnot. And I just wonder, like, again, this is one of those dicey things where I don't want to give the state more power, but it's like, I don't know if you have evidence of people saying that, is that enough to view them as like a invader or terrorist and stop them? And you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of Casimir's point, which I'm kind of like with you on this. Like, I actually had a whole debate with Casimir on this sometime in the last year, and it's complicated because on one hand, I feel like sometimes there are these oversimplistic, cartoonish depictions of Islam and Islamists. And listen, there's all sorts of, not just in the mainstream media, but I think in social media, that the algorithms and the content creators are often sensationalizing claims or making unfounded claims. And you
Yeah.
got to like be really careful with that. But I also feel like we can go too far the other direction. And I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think to Casimir's point, some people I think do just sort of have this sort of like a naive view of other cultures or the Arab world and just kind of be like, oh, they're all just like us.
Yeah, that's silly, right?
Right.
The question to me is, are there enough that they're trying to get here to take over the country? I don't believe so. Then there's the argument the Chinese are sending people here. I don't buy any of that. Now, if you're asking me personally, not constitutionally, if I'm the boss, what is my position on immigration? If I'm the boss and you have somebody that wants to come into the country and there's evidence of them saying we want to go there to take over the country, we're going to wait, I'd say get them the fuck out. Right? I don't have a sorry to swear if I'm not supposed to, but you know what I mean. I don't have an issue with that. I don't even have an issue if I had my druthers. If I'm the guy that decides, I would say if somebody's got a communicable disease and there's evidence of it, you don't let them in. And if somebody is demonstrated to be a violent risk to people, you know what I mean. If there's good evidence, I wouldn't let them in. But that's it.
Yeah. No, I think there's. I think we could do like a whole podcast just on this.
Sure.
It's like I don't know that I think we're in the same chapter. Like maybe not on quite the same page, but I feel like we're kind of understanding where we're at. And I think we're actually kind of close on that. I know there's a lot more on Buchanan we could talk about, but let's try to maybe hit maybe one or two of those really quick because I do want to talk about Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson.
Too.
Okay, I'll do him. Buchanan opposed free trade. Now, obviously, he hasn't been proven right on that because he's wrong.
Right.
Right. So obviously that is, and the American people by and large support trade. You do have about 40%, I think, that support protectionism of some sort, but by and large, Americans support free trade.
Yeah.
Trump did not get elected on a wicked mandate. And he didn't get elected because he was this superb guy. He got elected because he was running against a buffoon.
Yeah, no, I think that's
right.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with you on free trade. I think there's also this irony, and Hoppe made this point, that like when you restrict free trade, you actually increase the incentive for immigration in totality, including illegal immigration. And there's actually less of an incentive for people to come to America if they can have the full economic benefits of trading with America. So that's something that I think just, all the MAGA people, all the, like, I'm all for non-interventionism, but I don't like the term isolationist because it usually means non-interventionism and anti-free trade, and I am not anti-free trade.
So the other two things we can just run through these is that Buchanan opposed abortion. Most Americans support it. Whether you could be, that's an argument that could go on forever and ever, whether it's murder. So I don't see how he could be vindicated on that. In gay marriage and homosexuality, most people support it. Most people aren't opposed to that. What is he talking about? This is what I mean. So Casimir just now says, does Michael really think this is comparable to the Middle East? I don't know what he's talking about. So I have to ignore it. Like, I'd like to engage him, but I'm clueless as to what he's talking about.
Here's what we'll do. We will put a pin in that. And I think this is actually a really good conversation that maybe the three of us should schedule at some point down the road.
Me, and Casimir?
Yeah.
I'll do it. Listen, Casimir, he's always coming in and taking shots at me on X. I don't block him. I actually had a decent conversation with him when it was, over the phone. It was nice, but I don't mind that.
Here's the thing about Casimir you learn, and I've learned to kind of like check myself here, is that this is what he does. He comes into the comments or he comes on X and he comes punching. But then if you actually have a conversation with him, he's pleasant. And he's even said that's kind of his approach. And you can criticize that, but I think he's not a
I'm up for it. The three of us, we could have it out. We could, anybody, if you want to see, listen, I'm on the Capitalist Corner. Mark Pellegrino is one of my best friends in the world. Today on the Capitalist Corner, we ended up screaming at each other for a good 10 minutes. I don't mind arguing. I'm fine with it.
It's so funny that like I know Mark more from, I was a big fan of the Supernatural show. So anytime I see him, I'm just like making jokes about him being the devil, but not like to insult him just because he played the devil for.
Yeah. All right. You want to do Tucker? We could pivot to Tucker.
Yeah, let's talk about Tucker, because the abortion and gay marriage stuff would be just giant wormholes. You're certainly right that the country, he's not been vindicated on those views entirely, even though I have specific opinions on those.
Okay. Do you want me to just make my argument against Tucker Carlson?
Yeah.
And then you can respond? Okay.
Go ahead.
First of all, epistemologically, he's faith-based, heavily religious. I know you are as well. I don't think that you go as far as he does. He's actually said your gut will never lie to you. If you feel deception, then you are being lied to. So he says that your feelings are adequate means of perception, of gaining knowledge. The guy says, let's talk about his credibility. He says the US government works with demons. He says demons are flying around and that demons are traveling underwater. He says demons attacked him in his sleep. So he makes these like just far out claims. But now listen, like look at the factual claims he makes. He says that polygraphs are accurate. He doesn't know why they aren't allowed in court. In good conditions in labs, they're about 70% accurate. But he says it's just a fact. It's just a fact. No, Tucker, it's not a fact. He said, we still don't know how they built the pyramids or when. Also not true. Anybody can Google it. They do know. So he's wrong about that. He says no one believes in Darwinian evolution anymore. That's obviously not true. Even if you think evolution is wrong, scientists accept it. Most people accept it. In his conversation with Nick Fuentes, he says that pornography is making people gay, and that porn is a bigger threat than Iran. In his private chats, he said he hates Trump, but then at the convention, he says he loves Trump. He recently said that if he had a daughter like Liz Cheney, he would commit suicide. He took pot shots at Dick Cheney. This after saying, as you know, basically as a Christian, he doesn't do this kind of stuff. I submitted a couple of his episodes to Grok for analysis on how many inaccuracies. In Tucker Carlson's conversation with Joe Rogan, according to Grok, Tucker was wrong 19 times. In his conversation on his recent podcast where they talked about the Christian genocide, 18 inaccuracies. When he interviewed Nick Fuentes, 12 times he let Nick Fuentes get away with major inaccuracies and didn't check them. So credibility, in my view, his credibility's pure garbage. Now, if we go to his views, well, at the Republican convention, he insinuated he's for the war on drugs, saying we know where they are when they're bringing these drugs in. We were able to bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Why can't we get these guys? He's a big supporter of tariffs, and he's heavily criticized libertarian and Austrian economics, saying it's bad for people, the regular people. You know, we're beholden to ideology. And then he says, and this is back to his credibility, he says that the Republican Party is beholden to libertarian economics. In what world are these guys who support a welfare state, drive up the debt, like they won't even contemplate getting rid of these programs? In what world are the Republican Party beholden to the economics of Ludwig von Mises?
Dude, can we just pause there for a second? Because I want to know who is spreading this propaganda. I've heard Tucker say it. I've heard Michael Knowles say it. I've heard Andrew Wilson say it. This claim that like the libertarians duped the conservatives and the Republican Party, and that's why Republicans have failed in the economy. I'm just like, when did libertarians ever get into the driving seat of the conservative movement or Republican
So what do you
Party?
conclude? What do you conclude from that, though? You have to conclude either they're dumb or they're lying. I don't see another option because it's obviously ridiculous.
I think that Tucker is a mixed bag. I don't think that Tucker is like a philosophical role model. I don't think that he's like a true intellectual. I think in some ways, I think a lot of people like him because he's kind of like a regular guy and just kind of speaks his mind. And yeah, a lot of his stuff is kind of just based on intuiting stuff or is just wild speculation. And it's fair to criticize him for that. I mean, I believe as a Christian that there's demonic influence, but I think you got to be careful about like, you know, as a Christian, you need to have some kind of epistemology for evaluating and checking that stuff. That's not just like my feels. So I think Tucker was really good during COVID. I think Tucker was one of the few people who was willing to.
Didn't he call for lockdowns, Jacob?
There's a lot of people who, I guess, like if you go early, like to the very beginning of COVID, when there was a lot of uncertainty and fear, yeah, there's a lot of people who got that maybe wrong on day one. But certainly by the time you get to later in 2020, he was one of the earliest on Fox News, when he's still part of the mainstream media, who was willing to kind of challenge the COVID regime and take a lot of flack for that. He was willing to, and maybe he goes too far in some of these things, but he was willing to challenge the sort of index card of allowable opinion, or the Overton window, when it comes to support for Ukraine and Russia and support for Israel and their war in Gaza. And so he's uh, he's a mixed bag. I think there's a lot of the things you brought up are the things where I would either be kind of neutral or iffy on Tucker, or probably critical of him in a similar way to what you are. But there's just other things where I think he's one of the few voices on the right, and did this while he was still at Fox, who was willing to say things that kind of challenge the hegemony of the mainstream conservative Inc. viewpoints that are so fundamentally wrong in the
Is
worst
he though?
ways.
Is
Well,
he?
where do you disagree?
Well, you earlier mentioned the people back in the day, the mainstream conservatives who tried to cancel Pat Buchanan. Have you ever watched what Tucker Carlson said about Pat Buchanan back
Oh
then?
yeah, no, I mean Tucker is a self-admitted, he used to be a neocon, and he
No, I
used to,
got it. Okay,
yeah.
he was. Then he was at CNN. He was at the Weekly Standard. Then he was at Cato. Then he was at Fox. And I'm all for changing your opinion. Listen, I was for the Iraq War. Now I'm not. It healed me forever of that disease of interventionism, right? But when you start to see somebody's views change according to where the money is, I'm getting a little skeptical, especially when you see in public how he talks about Trump and in private how he talked about Trump.
Yeah, I
And
think
when I
that
see all these lies, how can I believe what he says?
I do think that, listen, I think it is, if you wanted to say that we need to treat Tucker as someone that we take what he says with a grain of salt, like when I tell people, like, if I was going to give them a list of like the top 15 people I listen to and I consider them a uh, trustworthy source of getting news and analysis and getting at the truth, Tucker doesn't make my list on that. So
Well, that's good. Now, Dave called him a hero. That's where this started. Dave called him a hero and called him
so
the great Tucker Carlson.
I
That's what I disagree with.
Well, I think that the things that Tucker got right and the stances he took, and even like, let's just say for sake of argument, that we took the most cynical view and say that he had some ulterior motives for those stances. The impact he had, and the fact that he, in my opinion, took the right stances on some of these very important issues and kind of spoke to what a lot of people's frustrations were, when it was like, during like 2020 and 2021, it was like, so we're locked in our homes, but people can go out and riot, and that's okay, right? He called that stuff out, and maybe got COVID wrong early on, but then quickly shifted and was a voice for people who were seeing the corruption and seeing that the COVID insanity didn't have any, didn't
See,
have a sound basis for what they were doing. And then I think he was also one of the earliest to call out the sort of like the sort of narrative that was being told about the Russia and Ukraine war. And then we got a lot of flack for then doing the same thing with Israel and Gaza. Now, his handling of all of those things, I can find holes to poke on all of them.
yeah.
So I'm not, but I think it's kind of like, if I'm evaluating him on my standard as a libertarian and Christian, of the type of Christian I am, he's not good enough for me. But when I consider, like, okay, but like, compared to the swamp of the mainstream media, and that people were listening to him when they're not likely to listen to the people that I would listen to and recommend, I go, all right, he had a very positive impact on those few things. So I am going to give him credit for that and be glad that, like, overall, on balance, I am glad that we had Tucker Carlson, not Bill O'Reilly, kind of like leading and
Okay.
speaking to a lot
So,
of people. And so this is kind of like a compared to what sort of
okay.
thing.
So there's a couple things that I want to say. First, when you have the top influencer that's known as a libertarian in the country, Dave Smith, it's unequivocal, right? If you're talking about, we could argue, is he a libertarian, not a libertarian? I really don't care about that right now. The point is, he's known as a libertarian, especially to people who aren't libertarians. They know him from Joe Rogan. Maybe they turn into his podcast. You have a libertarian like that referring to this guy as great and as a hero. Somebody that's not a libertarian that knows what Tucker Carlson is like, what? But that's just not good. You have to be careful. Do you remember you and I talking? We were talking over Twitter when you were going to endorse Trump. And by the way, your admission that you were wrong, I find so commendable. We're all wrong at times, and it's important when we just I got it wrong. It happens. I was wrong about Iraq. That's worse than being wrong about Trump, right? And I told you have to be careful because then that becomes what you're associated with. And if you're giving him praise, not you, but Dave, he's a hero, that's dangerous. But something I want to ask you, because it seems to me that I missed something because I was in prison at the time. And I was dealing with my own COVID problems. It seems like COVID has so fundamentally shaped so many people's views that when, like you said, well, he was good on COVID, that it's almost like being good on COVID in some people's minds outweighs like everything else. But it doesn't do that for me. I don't care that he was good on COVID when he's for tariffs and getting on his show and criticizing libertarian economics. I don't care that he's good on COVID when he's giving all these lies, mistruths, when he's got Nick Fuentes in front of him and doesn't challenge him on his false claims. But a lot of people, the people that were good on COVID, they really appreciate that. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, I think so. So let me do this because we're short on time. Here's how
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
got it.
do
No,
it. Yeah.
I know. You
So
told me 9:00. You've already given me way extra.
yeah, no, it's fine. So I'm gonna just remind people that when this is done, if you're on YouTube, you'll be redirected to the live stream I have coming up after this, where I'm actually going to be talking about Dave Smith and the video that Liquid Zulu did, and kind of get into that, because I was part of the Mises Caucus, and a lot of that was criticizing Dave and the Mises Caucus strategy, and I was in that video, so I figured, well, I'll kind of give a short, reaction and thought, because I thought there was stuff there that I agreed with and disagreed with. So I want to let people know that that's coming up. And yeah. So on what you and then so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my kind of final remark on that and then give you the last word.
Sure.
So I think that two things can be true at the same time. Like, because I don't really disagree with what you're saying. I guess I just kind of feel like we live in a society where sometimes we have to kind of accept the flawed people who make an impact for what they do. And like, listen, like we said, we have to change the culture. I wish that there were people who, instead of being drawn to Tucker, or even to Candace, even though I have kind of a similar view about her, or to just these big I wish people found better heroes overall, right? Uh, at the same time, I guess I feel like there is like we needed someone to do the job on these important things, and COVID could have gone so much worse. And I guess I feel like because we are out of it now, maybe you disagree, but I feel like we can, maybe because we're no longer in it, we forget how bad it was and how much worse it could have gotten if there wasn't enough, voices speaking out, and sort of like very large pockets of civil disobedience where people just kind of stopped obeying the mandates in all these places. And it could have gotten so much worse. I mean, they were threatening vaccine passports, they were
Yeah.
threatening all sorts of ways to track your movement and make it so that you couldn't. So like it could have gotten so much more totalitarian, and opened up the window to things that would be, for as bad as we are right now in terms of our economy, and we still have the Patriot Act, we still have government surveillance. We don't live in a great society, but it could have been a lot worse. So uh I think it's kind of like we have to find this tension to, I think, I want to give, I think actually the right approach is to give people like Tucker as much credit as you can for the things that they were good on, so that people will take you more seriously when you criticize them on the things that they're bad on. So that's kind of the way I try to do it. I try to go, hey man, Tucker, you were so great on COVID. Now, can we talk about how you're inconsistent when you had the right stance on COVID, but the same logic that led you to say that COVID was wrong should make you be hesitant about making a giant police state to do mass deportations, right? And so you kind of, that's the way I think that we need to go about it. But I do understand where you're coming from. As I said, I want to give you the last word before we hop off here.
I largely agree with that. I'm a big fan of giving credit where it's due. I just don't see too much credit in Tucker. Granted, I wasn't around to be watching him during COVID. You know what I mean? I didn't have Fox News in the big house. I watched him a lot in years past. I used to like him. Now, not so much. But all that aside, I really, whatever. Jacob, thanks for having me on, man. It's always great to talk to you. I told you in private, I think you're a really good dude. I'll tell you that here. I think you're a good dude. You've been nothing but respectful to me, in person over here. I love to spar with you. You're polite, respectful. You can disagree without thinking the other person's evil. Keep doing what you're doing, man. And I'll be happy to come back on with Casimir, no matter how much he gets under my skin.
He's gotten under my skin too, man. So you're not alone in that camp. And listen, man, same back to you. I've enjoyed our conversations, and you're always welcome to come on to spar about whatever we want to spar about. I feel like we agreed a lot more this time than we did the last time we had you on. But yeah, listen, man. Tell people again where they can find both of your the things you do. Capitalist Corner and Rational Egoist.
I'll say so. The Rational Egoist is my regular is my podcast. It's my own podcast. It's mostly interviews. I've interviewed some of the top libertarians and objectivists out there. I've debated some of the top libertarians and objectivists out there. I've debated some leftists, some conservatives, but mostly I just do interviews on ideas. You can just check that out, Rational Egoist, on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And then I do the Capitalist Corner every day at 12 o'clock. I do it with the aforementioned Mark Pellegrino of Supernatural fame. We discuss current events from a pro-capitalist perspective. And we sometimes argue, and not as civilly as Jacob and I argued tonight. But thanks again, Jacob, and thanks to the audience.
Yeah, of course. Everyone go check out Michael. He's like, listen, he's one of the people who I would say, like, even though we don't share all of our priors on, religion and worldview and things like that, he's one of the good ones. He's someone that, you're one of the good, like, you probably think about me in terms of Christians or anarchists, but like in terms of objectivists or people who kind of loosely use that label, you're one of the good ones. You'd probably agree a lot of objectivists can sometimes not be the best representatives of objectivism.
I thought, and I'll leave you with this. When I got out of prison, my plan was to unite objectivists, libertarians, because I've been studying this stuff for decades. And I said, this, I can do this. There's no reason to have these tensions. I became the spokesperson for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut. And I'm like, all right, I'm on my way. It took weeks. And I realized, nope. can't happen. There are a lot of jerks
we're showing
a variety of labels.
We're showing them how to do it right, Michael. So
yes,
that's all that matters. But thanks for being on here, man.
Thank you, brother. Have a good night.
We'll do it again. Thanks everybody for listening. And I'll talk to you guys on the next stream.